Hi, everybody. Welcome in. It's good to have everyone join us this afternoon. Um, for folks who are familiar with our webinars, what I'm about to say, you probably already know. But for those folks who are new to the webinars that we do, some of the information that I'm going to share might be of importance. But I'll just go over this as we wait for more people to trickle in, and then we'll get started with our wonderful presentation. So this is what I call our housekeeping. So just go over some of this important information. We are recording this webinar, so if there are parts that you want to like rewind, or maybe there are parts that you missed, you just want to watch the recording, uh, we will send out the recording to the emails that you registered with. We also upload all of our webinar content on our YouTube channel. This is a shameless plug, but feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. All of our past content lives there, so you'll be able to access it at your convenience. And of course, if you have colleagues that wanted to attend and didn't, you can just send them that recording. As far as webinar timing goes, you'll be with us for about an hour. We have 40 minutes worth of presentations, and then we'll use the remaining time for moderated Q&A. You'll notice you have a questions tab, or like a drop down, which you can ask your questions there. The only people that will be able to see it is me and the co-presenters. It's a really cool way to interact with our panelists. So just be sure, if you do have questions, you are more than welcome to use it throughout the presentations, or you can wait until the very end. Personally, if I have a question, if I don't write it down right away, I'll probably forget it. If you're like that, I encourage you to just put it down in there, and we'll wait until the moderated Q&A session to answer them. That said, chat is disabled, but again, you can use that questions function. If you want to just practice using it just for the sake of using it, just go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell me your name, organization, and location. So yeah, give everyone a couple seconds to do that. Let folks trickle in. All right. So it looks like we have a pretty good mass of people here, so we can go ahead and get started. So I want to again welcome everyone. I want to thank our lab viewers for attending this really important discussion today, as well as our wonderful presenters who will be sharing their insights with us. Also, our non-live viewers who will be viewing this recording, thank you for attending as well. It pains me to say this, but this is our final webinar of our Changing the Narrative series. And today we're focusing on how we can amplify stories of homelessness in a way that can drive meaningful change in our effort to end veteran homelessness. So if you are unfamiliar with our work at the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, or NCHV for short, our goal is to put an end to veteran homelessness. And we do that in a few ways. One, by sharing best practices, working in the policy space, as well as connecting veterans and service providers with helpful resources. We also run a hotline to do that. So in this specific webinar, we'll be talking a lot about stories and storytelling. As we know, stories have an incredibly powerful effect on the way we connect with ideas. We had a webinar a few months ago with Mari Solveo from the Housing Narrative Lab, and she puts it best. Stories, empathy, and an understanding for others. And in our world as homeless advocates and practitioners, storytelling is an excellent avenue to connect our mission to challenge the negative narratives about homelessness. We know that veterans who have experienced homelessness aren't monolithic, and everyone has a unique story to tell. And some of those stories can be incredibly traumatic and might, reopen wounds that some people just aren't prepared to confront quite yet. We value veterans with lived experience and the amazing insights they bring to this work. And those perspectives offer a window into the reality of homelessness and informs the practice of service providers. When we collaborate with veterans who are ready to share those stories, we need to be thoughtful throughout the process. So think of ways that we consider how these stories are being shared, and evaluate what those goals for sharing that story is. As well as thinking about ways we build trust with the veteran and create a space or a safe environment for them to share their story. That said, we have two experts who will be sharing a variety of different practices that we can use to authentically empower the voices and stories of homeless veterans, as well as how to share those stories in multiple spaces. So we're joined first by Mark Horvath, founder of Invisible People, and Katie Ettl, communications and public relations coordinator at Swords to Plowshares. Um, like I said, we'll save a Q&A for the very end. Mark will share first, and then we'll hear words from Katie. So Mark, you have the floor.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Let me get set up here so that we're all ready to go. I am not going to speak much about me because I want to get right into it. Just really quick, I'm the founder of Invisible People, formerly homeless. Over the last decade or so, I've traveled to over 300 cities, 9 countries. Wait. After Finland, I think we're at 11 different countries, interviewing homeless people and those that are trying to help them, the working to solve homelessness. So, Invisible People has the probably the largest library on homelessness that's available from people of all different walks of life. And I have learned uh, right from the start, there's usually a lot of pushback. And we're going to go into that in a second because I think that tension between program staff and communication staff can is useful. You can create healthy tension to make sure that there's storytelling done right. So, but I'm going to start off first by just sharing some examples of how it's provided value to the people that are homeless. And what I mean by that is so often they say, oh, we can't tell their stories. But when done right, it can be very empowering. This is Louise. I interviewed her on the Strand in London about 10 years ago. She had been outside for a very long time. About 2 years ago, Louise sent me this email with a current picture of her, and one of the best lines was, I want to thank you for noticing me all them years ago. And this is Brenda. Brenda was on the streets of New York City. And after posted Brenda's video, she did something that was so amazing. She started responding to people's comments, right? I couldn't have even planned this. So here's a video of a homeless person, and the homeless woman is actually engaging with comments, often in real time. This is Rob. Rob was on the streets of Hollywood Boulevard, and I was actually walking with an NBC News crew. And after the interview, Rob went and watched the video, and that video changed his life. And he went to vocational college, got off the streets, and he says, thank you for not allowing me to be invisible anymore. So we got to remember that storytelling, engaging people to tell their story, because so often, right, you have somebody that's living on a sidewalk or living on a park, and they're ignored by society. So it can be really powerful when you give them your positive intention and help them share their story. This is Amber, and Amber is missing a lot of teeth. And I knew when I put the video up that the comments could get nasty. And we have a protocol. We'll talk about protocols in a bit. We have a protocol that no one gets hurt. So I would have removed Amber's video without question. Amber went and created her own YouTube channel and was recording videos to respond to the comments directly. Totally amazing. She didn't want her video removed. She just wanted to address the negative commenters. And this is Sabrina. Sabrina, I interviewed underneath this bridge. She opioid use disorder, and sadly, Sabrina passed away. I stayed in contact with Sabrina. This is her parents at her RV. And her parents continue to thank me. I'm still in contact with her parents. Sabrina thanked me for her video, and her parents thank me for her video because it's something they have to remember her by. This is Donnie. Donnie was on the streets of Calgary, I think, for like 26 years, an extremely long time. I put up his video, and the Calgary community rallied to get Donnie into housing. So that video was the catalyst that got Donnie into housing. And if you don't believe me, CBC documented YouTube video helps homeless man find a flat. This is Terry Pettigrew. Terry Pettigrew is 58 years old in this photo. He was homeless at 8 years old. He'd been homeless for 50 years. He's dying of stage 4 cancer in a homeless shelter. I mean, my heart was breaking. And I put up the video, and the Calgary newspaper also put the video up on their homepage. And Terry was reunited with his brother that he hadn't seen for over 30 years. So Terry ended up passing away with family. And reconnection is very powerful, but there's some pros and cons to reconnection we'll talk about in a second. Another reason to empower homeless people to share their own story is so often nonprofits, we have our executive director or a research scientist or somebody talk about homelessness that's an expert. If you look at our research that we did back in 2020, the least what resonates with the public is information from an expert. So you want to share stories from the people that you're helping, from the people that you helped, and the people that need help. And let me clarify that. Stories of people that are in housing are important because they validate the work. Stories of homeless people still in some state of homelessness are what create empathy and move people to action. Both are important. Now, I don't know how many comms people are in this call, and I don't know how many programs people, but I'm sure there is conflict, right? The programs people are saying, my clients, I want privacy. You can't interview my clients. And the comms people are saying, we need stories. We need stories. I believe that is healthy tension, right? If the programs people are not fighting for privacy, they're not doing their job. And if the comms people aren't seeking out stories, they aren't doing their job. And by having that healthy tension between comms and programs, it will get it so you have ethical storytelling, that you will create stories and empower people in a way that nobody gets hurt. And we're going to shift a little bit into more protocol and what I've developed over the years in interviewing homeless people. And by no means is this an extensive, exhaustive list. There's much more to it. I'm just giving, the overarching protocols and that I go by to establish the conversation. And number one is nobody gets hurt. So the best example I can use of this is if I'm talking to a homeless person and they're a victim of domestic violence, I immediately stop, right? I have to establish, are they safe? If they're going to tell their story, is it going to put them at risk? And there's ways to tell stories anonymously. So we've done a full documentary where the person didn't want his face And we did the complete documentary so that they would remain anonymous. And we also interviewed a homeless man who had a full-time job and had to take off the day to move his tent for a sweep, that also didn't want, he wanted to be anonymous. So, you can do audio, you can, blur out faces, you can tell the story in writing and change the name. There's a lot of ways to tell sensitive stories but it's important that nobody gets hurt. Often, and this has happened quite a few times, where homeless people have said stuff during the interview that could get them in trouble, and I immediately stopped the interview. I have hard drives full of people that I interviewed that I will never post. Often people will want to tell their stories, and maybe their mental illness or their addiction doesn't come out until you start rolling camera. And I continue to record the video. And then I say, thank you very much, but I know I'm never going to post it, because our number one rule is no one gets hurt. As far as protocol, we will not interview anybody with severe mental illness or someone that is severely intoxicated. Now, we will record interviews with people that, are sober and not nodding, or suffer from schizophrenia but not having an episode, where they talk about their mental illness and where they talk about their addiction. But we would never put someone online or even interview them. And I could talk about the protocols we have, for a very long time. Happy to answer questions, or even, when this is over, people can reach out to me directly. Informed consent. When you're interviewing a homeless person, or for when you're asking for their story, you need to be very specific about how that story is going to be used. Is it going to be on YouTube? Are you using it on social media? Is it going to be used for fundraising? There's a lot of different ways stories can be used, and you need to be specific so that person can make an informed decision. I cannot stress how important informed consent is. We will never, ever interview someone unless they have given consent, informed consent. Safety first. Now, we live in a world, I'm not saying homeless encampments are dangerous. We live in a world where going into a Walmart, a church, a synagogue, a movie theater, a grocery store is dangerous. So you have to be aware of your surrounding, whether it's a homeless camp or Walmart or your movie theater, right? So if you do not feel safe, don't go there, right? This is a key component to storytelling when you're out on the streets. It might not fit all of you, but if anyone's out on the streets like I am, interviewing homeless people, safety is important. Respect everyone. Pretty simple. But if you respect people, you get respect back. I give out socks. I have a backpack full of socks. Many of you know this. And, it could be water, it could be, granola bars. I personally hate granola bars. I mean, that's an but that's what people give out. Have something, to me, it helps make or start communication. It's also an interesting test because, like here, this was Toronto, Canada. Almost everyone has a winter coat. Lots of people are wearing backpacks. You don't know who's homeless and who's not homeless. So for me, when I go up and ask them if they want socks, a homeless person will say, "Hey, white gold," where somebody that is not homeless is like, "Huh? Leave me alone. Get out of here." But, and it shouldn't be transactional, right? So like everybody gets socks, everybody I give something to, but it's not in condition of telling their story. It's just a way of making conversation. Now, this is the best photo I could find to do this. Is I give a compliment. So when I approach somebody, I'll say, hey man, that's a really cool sign. Or I love that hat. Oh, I used to have a bicycle like that. Oh, I like that song you're playing. I compliment them on something that they're wearing or music they're playing or something that just kind of opens up conversation. I think it's really important to find something, even if you don't like the hat, even if you don't like the sign, right? Say so. I mean, be honest and say, that's a really interesting sign. Find something that you could just break the ice with and compliment them on. Let's talk about reconnection. There's actually even a nonprofit that does reconnection. So families can often be the cause of homelessness, right? And it's important. Our protocol is that we put the power of reconnection in the hands of the homeless person. So I know there's nonprofits out there that try to post on social media to reconnect with family members and then they connect them. I would never do that. What we do is if a family member connects to a story and then they connect to us, we will take the information and then we will reach out to the homeless person and say, hey, your sister contacted us. Here's her email, or your brother contacted us, or whatever the case may be. If you want to connect with them, that's your decision. We never, ever just give out a homeless person's information or contact information. Now, on occasion, I have gone and looked. Like there was one story we posted, and the brother contacted me, and I looked for years and eventually found him, the person. And when I found him, I said, "Hey, your brother's, wanting to contact you," but I never gave the brother the information. You have to, and families are such an interesting dynamic. You have to put the power with the homeless person. Now, we compensate when we do documentaries. So our initial invisible people is more news, right? But the when we do a documentary, right, or something where we have to have a signed release, and often many times you have to have a signed release, we compensate the person. Now, I know a lot of nonprofits give $20 or something. We compensate more than a non-union actor's day rate. So we normally give around $300. Sometimes we give 50, but an actor's day rate in Los Angeles, non-union, is 200. We give another 100, and it's only for a short amount of time. And why I feel this is important is, your marketing people are being paid. The person writing the newsletter or editing the video, your communications team, they're all being compensated. And I think it's important that we compensate people for their stories. But there's some caveats here. There's some protocols. If you're handing anything of value to a homeless person, especially if you're in a homeless encampment, you got to be careful that no one else sees it. I learned this the hard way, even before I started working with homeless, even before I was homeless myself. My girlfriend, where she worked, there was an elderly homeless woman that was outside. We gave her a blanket, and the next day, the elderly woman had a black eye and no blanket. So when we're passing on something that could be perceived of value, we're very careful that other people around don't see it. Now, in most, settings, you have to have accountability. And for us, like we've developed an app that we have on our phone so that the person can sign a receipt so it doesn't look like they're getting money. And it could be anything of value. It could be a bicycle. It could be, whatever that you're handing to that homeless person. If it's something of value, you have to be really conscious of the environment around and who is watching for that homeless person's safety. And that's it. That is the brief overview. Happy to answer any questions either in this webinar or after. And hopefully that gave you, at least a starting point of, developing your own protocols. So, like when I said no one gets hurt, I have protocols that I establish before I even interview anyone. And I would recommend that you establish protocols for your storytelling before you engage homeless people or formerly homeless people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a wonderful presentation. And I really like the points where you touched upon giving power back to doing. I want to talk a little bit more about that when we open up the Q&A. So I'll hold on to those questions. Our next presentation will come from Katie Ettl. Katie, you have the floor.
Can people hear me?
I can hear you, Katie. You're good.
Okay. It's interesting that it says it's muted. Thank you, Mark, for that really informative and colorful is the word that I want to use for that presentation, just because I loved the imagery that you had and the images of the people that you've connected with. I think you mentioned or kind of conveyed, these people are deemed invisible, but their issues are extremely visible. And so I think this, my presentation is going to be like a good kind of pairing with Mark's, because I wanted to focus this more on the veteran experience of homelessness. So I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, for those who haven't heard of Swords to Plowshares, we are a nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We serve locally but have a national impact. It's our 50th anniversary this year. And we provide wraparound services to around 3,000 veterans every year, whether that's help with housing, help with job and employment training. We provide free legal services. But at the end of the day, one of our biggest mission is to end homelessness and poverty among veterans. And that's also why we have such a strong partnership with the National Coalition of to End Veteran Homelessness. So, yeah. So in talking about creating spaces for veteran stories, I have some goals for you all. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll learn some tips on building trust with veterans by utilizing principles of cultural humility, which I think Mark was connecting to, treating people with respect. That's pretty much the key takeaway from cultural humility. I'm going to provide some examples to promote storytelling as an empowering experience for veterans. And I hope we will be able to gain some knowledge on amplifying how you can amplify your mission and your organization's goals through ethical storytelling, which Mark also mentioned. When we're working with veterans, I think a lot of you all who are either service providers, or comms professionals who have experience working with veterans. They're a unique group, right? They have a very specific lived experience that not many people also hold. PTSD and homelessness increase a sense of otherness, and being a veteran also, increases a sense of otherness that no one else has gone through. I've gone through what I've gone through, besides like the people who were in my unit or who I served with. Um, on the other side of that, because that unique experience is so specific to them, veterans have a strong sense of duty to others, to other vets, and can be motivated to be of service to them, which I think is something to keep in mind when you are eventually connecting with a veteran who you think has a story to share. Um, Another point that I mentioned too here is that veterans have the tendency to historicize their lived experiences. So instead of talking in I statements or saying how they feel about a certain experience, a coping mechanism for trauma or just for difficult memories is to connect those memories and those experiences to what was going on in broader history, or in the experience of their whole like military back, like their military unit, to kind of like remove themselves a bit from that hurt, and so they can, translate that story to you a bit more in a way that they can feel okay to talk about. So I bring up those 3 points just to like have a bit of a like cultural understanding. Like veterans are a unique population, like I said, and if you're ever interested in learning more about how to work within the veteran space and how to engage with all different kinds of veterans, Source of Plowshares provides a combat to community education webinar, and that is something our policy team puts on. I'll put a link in that to the chat. That's definitely helpful for advocates and professionals who want to learn more about military culture and veteran culture. So yeah, next up, when we're trying to tell these stories of homelessness, of struggle, PTSD, like Mark mentioned, people need to be treated with respect. These are like not just like stories or narratives for comms people to push out to the broader public. They're actual I use the word gifts. They are extremely personal. And Source of Plowshares uses the principles of cultural humility to make sure every interaction that we have with a veteran, whether it's indirect service meetings, whether it's visiting encampments, we want to make sure that the veteran feels seen, heard, and welcomed. A big part of Swords to Plowshares is that we don't discriminate based on military service, time, how long someone served, the era that they served in, among other, lived identities. So cultural humility, which includes redressing power imbalances, knowing that relationship that you have as like a professional versus a client who wants services, is key to respecting like their own boundaries for what they want to share in regards to their lived experiences. We also use cultural humility as a tool to help ensure our work ends up empowering the veteran through storytelling rather than feeling like it's a transactional experience. We kind of point out that language is a powerful like framework. And when we're using specific language to represent like the services that we provide, we also don't want to have like a possessive outlook towards like the veteran that is utilizing those services. So we refrain from using possessive like adjectives and other connotations like our veterans, our residents at X housing site. We don't possess these veterans. They come to us for services. Also, cultural humility, it helps us in navigating traumatic memories with a veteran and ensures that we're going at their own pace. Something that I also want to point out is that like when we are interviewing a veteran, when a direct service member, like a colleague of mine, points out like, hey, this veteran has an interesting story, Katie. I keep in mind that like I'm not going to immediately understand this person's full story or relationship to Swords to Plowshares immediately, especially when you're dealing with traumatic memories, when you're dealing with difficult pasts. Like, it's really important for you as the comms professional to make sure that the veteran feels comfortable and that you're not trying to rush the information out of them. That kind of connects with this next portion, which is presenting the opportunity. Where are you connecting with these veterans? I know for Swords to Plowshares, I get to connect with veterans at in all different sorts of environments, including like our drop-in centers where people who don't have a mailing address can use our centers as their mailing address to receive mail, going out on encampment tours with our outreach staff, or connecting with previously unhoused veterans in our housing sites. I think that presenting the opportunity to share someone's story can look a lot of different ways, and we can use our knowledge on what veterans enjoy to create those kind of opportunities where people feel safe to share whatever they'd like to about being a veteran, about utilizing resources from your nonprofit. And at the end of the day, like as Mark mentioned too, consent and communication are key, informed consent. So when I am going to different locations, I don't just start with, I have this, I usually carry a camera as well when I'm gathering stories. I don't just start with, hey, I want to take your photo. I introduce myself as, the photographer of the day, or my role, communications coordinator at Swords to Plowshares. And then we, talk about whatever. Like, I think that meal services are really like a great way to meet veterans, like Mark mentioned, handing out different items, creating that first contact as in a way that is friendly is important. Lastly, I wanted to focus too on what I see the main duties are as a communications professional or a staff member who's aiming to collect stories from this population, which is beforehand, you need to create clear lines of communication that amend to a veteran's needs, and you kind of like work together with the veteran on, does this person have mobility issues? Do they have access to a phone? Can they use email? You can also work with direct service staff to figure out like what's best for that veteran and what you can do to align yourself with their journey towards getting assistance. Another thing that's important too beforehand is like producing a timeline of whatever project that you like and a description of how you archive stories, so you can say to the veteran, inform them on, this is where I'm going to put down our interview. It's going to be in X catalog, and this is how I'm going to use it. delineating the audience is really important. You know, PTSD has a kind of it has a some folks who have PTSD are paranoid, right? And when we are dealing with folks who have these lived experiences that have now, made them maybe distrustful of people in power, or made them feel scared, it's really important to be that friend that can inform them on why you are interacting with them. And with an audience, when there is an audience that will be receiving this story, it's really important for veterans to have a clear sense of who's going to know about me. Yeah. So you just want to minimize any fear to make sure that they trust you. Another tool for honest stories, which Mark mentioned, is ethical storytelling. And like I kind of talked about before, language is like really kind of powerful and heavy, especially when we're talking about such like important and critical issues that the broader public kind of can politicize or can use to represent a certain population. So for Swords to Plowshares, for my organization, we found that in order to do justice to the veteran, we need to make sure that the narratives and the stories that we take center that veteran as the expert of their own story. In ethical storytelling, it's framed by not just like talking about the struggles, talking about temporary barriers like addiction, houselessness. We also want to use it. We also want to, make sure these stories are framed with their aspirations, with the motivation for why they want to change, why they want to get out of houselessness. Sometimes it's obvious, but other times these stories are really complicated, and they deserve a discernment that's honest and caring from the person that's also producing the content. Ethical storytelling means that the results are not always traditional or conventional, but they're honest. I'm sure you all know in direct service work, people relapse. People will go back to homelessness. And those stories are just as important as, the story of a veteran getting a job at Tesla or wherever. And I think utilizing this kind of ethical storytelling lens helps us see that it's a partnership between the veteran and between the comms professional, and if the direct service member is also involved, it's a partnership to talk about the struggle. We're all in this together. Something that we talk about at Swords all the time is that all veterans, justice, liberation, it's all connected with each other, from the ones who, are patriotic to the ones who are struggling with their veteran identity. So I think along with that, why is it empowering to talk about veteran stories? It increases awareness on issues, and it's a healing step to acknowledge one's growth, overcoming pain, addiction, or other struggles. I'll share an example in a second about a veteran who really enjoyed talking about her story because it allowed her to see herself outside of the struggle. She got to see her growth from overcoming homelessness, from overcoming, employment, to actually becoming a beneficial and happy part of her community. yeah, it also, I think what's really important too is that a story can help you feel ownership over your life. And for folks that, struggle with, um, addiction, other temporary barriers, there's a total loss of control. And so when people can have that story, can look at it, can either hold that magazine up or, share that post on social media if they're on social media, there's a sense of tangibility of the story being tangible for the vet. And yeah, here's Ivy Dragon. So Ivy, I met Ivy in one of our housing sites. She served in the Navy for 8 years. And that's where she first became interested in her lifelong passion for computers. She got connected with Swords to Plowshares. During the pandemic, she lost her job and she found herself homeless. She moved to San Francisco, and finding a place to live was really difficult. And on top of it, she had job insecurity, income insecurity. So in February of last year, Ivy moved into one of our housing sites, and it allowed her to see that her issues weren't just what was in front of her. It wasn't just not having a steady job, and having the space to decompress, to figure out her mental health situation, um, gave her the time to actually go back to what she actually loves to do, which is mess around with computers. Within the first year of Ivy as a resident at the John Paulson Veterans Community, she built her own supercomputer. It's an awesome story. And when I heard that, I have to get a photo of that computer, which is right there. It's that red box. Also, if you want to read this story, I have the QR code right there on the PowerPoint too. But when I interviewed her, she just was so happy to be able to be known to her neighbors as someone who could help them. A lot of veterans that we serve are above the age of 55, and have a history of homelessness. A lot of them are not familiar with how to work a computer. So Ivy is now known as someone that her neighbors can go to learn about computer stuff. So I think the veterans learned about her not just through her carrying this like 60-pound machine around, but they also learned about it through her sharing her story through our website and our blog. And to me, it's just such a good example of how storytelling is a method of empowerment, and it's a way to build community among the people that we serve. It connects us all. Like Mark mentioned, storytelling is how we like capture like the hearts of people, of an audience. And I think that Swords to Plowshares, where I work, we really strive to touch the hearts of veterans in order to get them to use our services to enhance their lives in any way that they can. So it's a motivational tool. And that also takes community. This is my last slide. Like I mentioned, ethical storytelling, it takes time. And hopefully, you have a team of colleagues that also want to promote not just success, but the truth. And if I also have like experience working with external media partners. There are people out there who want to share stories that are about the issues veterans face. So I encourage you to like do your research, see what local news outlets are talking about houselessness or veterans issues, and you can set up introductory meetings to orient them on your service population. And, when the time comes, this is just a separate aside, but you can also be that kind of primary person to introduce veterans to opportunities with the external media. It's all, it's just a part of trying to get veterans to increase the public awareness, and also at the same time make sure that the storytelling is a healing process, or if not healing, affirming. And I think that more people need to start doing this work. As we see with this presidential election, there are a lot of stories that are being either, twisted or left in the weeds. And for us, veteran service providers, we need to be louder, I think. And if you ever want to connect further, here's my contact information. You can find Source to Plowshares that's helping vets on all social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing your questions. And thanks for your time.
All right, thank you, Katie. That was a wonderful presentation, and something that really stood out to me was um, the way you look at the relationship between um, the person who's sharing the story and and the conference, and you refer to it as a partnership. Um, I really like that. And also another thing you said was that results are not always traditional, but they're honest. Um, I don't know. I really admire like the authenticity in your guys' approach um, to collecting stories and sharing them. And I don't want to like indict organizations for only sharing like bright stories that exemplify their like success with their program, but it shows the
Yeah.
part of the issue. And
Well, if
um,
can I tag team on that, because I want
okay.
to say thank you, Katie, and you brought up a bunch of great points, and really the big one is just not showing, ta-da, well-behaved homeless person in beautiful apartment. Our Finland documentary, we do the most authentic look that I have seen on Housing First, because the person is still struggling, and I think the people, when we just show those ta-da perfect success stories, the public detaches. And for all of you, please, please, please start sharing how housing homeless people helps the community. What we're doing, and we've done so, is we show housing helps Jim. Jim has new appliances. Jim can take a shower. And we show this really nice apartment. And I bring up appliances because I saw a video yesterday where they're showing a new person with all his new appliances. And the public resents that. They work hard for their money, right? So, yes, show how housing helps the homeless person, but also say, housing is the only way to permanently remove those encampments, right? You got to share benefit to the public along with benefit to the homeless person.
Absolutely right, Mark. So I think we're ready to open up a conversation to Q&A. So for folks who have questions in our audience, go ahead and use the questions tab to ask those questions to Mark and Katie. This is a question specifically for Mark, so and Katie chime in as well. Sometimes stories can be re-traumatizing to the listener, whether the person who's listening is homeless, or do you have any protocols that you would recommend as to labeling those stories as, traumatic or having trigger warnings? If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Hi, RD. RD is also a friend. We've connected many times over the years. She's wonderful. I was at a screening last night of a new documentary about religious abuse. And I was next to the director, and she turned to me and she says, "Are you triggered?" So I want to say this because we all have gone through trauma. We all should be conscious of re-triggering trauma. It's not just homeless people. It's not just veterans. We've all gone through some tough times, and it's back just to nobody gets hurt. You got to do some pre-questions, and back to the informed consent is that, with talking to that person, you can establish. It's not a perfect science because it never is. People often bury their trauma, right? But you can establish that we probably should not interview this homeless person, or you can establish certain parameters. I think we often, uh, I hope that you hear my spirit in this. We should always be concerned about the person's well-being. We should always be concerned about re-triggering trauma, especially veterans homelessness, right? Many of these people have gone through, PTSD and different things. But we also have to look at how empowering telling their story can be a healing process, right? We and Katie gave a couple examples of that. I think it's really important to look at it, and have some balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add um, content warnings. I think should be like a content warning. For because there's also I've been in circumstances where people are like, well, is that in a way of censor? Is it part of censorship? Is it um, or does it like weigh down the power of something if you say a little precursor of whatever happens in X narrative. But I think just a simple content warning. There's domestic violence mentioned. I think the simpler the better, because one, whoever needs to know will be able to be clearly informed about why maybe they would not want to participate in hearing that. And then two, it still keeps the integrity of what the story wants to share. Yeah, I think there's ways to just be matter of fact about it. Um,
So this next question I have combines two, and this question is for the both of you. But how do you see storytelling evolve, or how do you think it's going to evolve over the years? And especially when you consider I guess, more like short form content versus some of the long form stuff that you do, Mark. Take, for example, like TikToks or Instagram Reels. Where do you see this trajectory going?
So let me go off mute there. I don't think storytelling evolves, right? We're still telling the same stories we drew on the caveman walls, right? In prehistoric times, right? It's the delivery of the stories. A lot of it, you asked a question that really depends on audience and your strategy. So I'll just give you a brief thing. So often now we say short form, short form, short form. People burst their bladders binge watching Netflix, right? They do. So what about this short form? Well, it depends, right? YouTube is now surpassed Netflix in the living room, right? It's impossible to get on Netflix, but you can get on YouTube, right? And that forces us, and I'm choosing that word force, to create compelling content. I was just at a journalism conference. TikTok is the fastest growing news source for Americans. And we still go to legacy media. My whole thing for storytelling, and it's the foundation of what we do, is become a media publisher. Start telling your own story. Start building an audience. Yes, reach out to traditional media. We did a collaboration with the New York Times this year. It was brilliant. But you can, if you got, everybody starts at zero, and the sooner you start building your audience, because you have control of the narrative, you can have control about how it's being shared. One thing that I will say really quick about, because I'm backpedaling a little bit, because storytelling has changed a little, is that, tell it up front. You'll see on Netflix, you don't see the openings of shows anymore, right? And so often we'll do a video and we'll say, "Oh, I'm Mark Horvath from Invisible People, and we do this, 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 this," and we spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about ourselves before we go into the video, right? Into the stories. People don't want that anymore, right? They don't want the opening. They don't want the fluff. Go right to the meat. Go right to the points. And even when you're live speaking, even in written communication, and very much, especially in video communication. And everything's moving to video. If you don't have a video strategy, you need to start.
I mean, I guess the only thing that I had to add, because I think definitely Mark is positioned better than I am to answer that. What I would like to see is I want to see more veteran stories and stories that are framed within issues of like the broader scheme of things. Like we can talk about veterans when we're talking about healthcare issues, when we're talking about homelessness at large, when we're talking about LGBTQ stories. Veterans are everywhere. And I think not a lot of people know that. Veterans are everybody. And yeah, so I would like to see veterans, infiltrate whatever hot topics are going on, or current trends. I think we're there. We have the power to be there. I'm not a veteran, but like, so yeah, I think I think that's what I'd like to see.
Like that. So
One additional comment: create content people want to watch. So often we create videos or maybe even write stuff that it doesn't resonate with people, right? And then you don't wonder why are we not gaining YouTube subscribers or TikTok subscribers or Instagram? You have to create, you reverse engineer it. What do I want people to do? Who is the audience? Where do they hang out? How do I create content that will resonate with them? Nonprofits create some of the most content. You have to think about creating content that will resonate with the public to get your message across.
couldn't agree more. So we are a little bit over on our webinar, so we do have to close out on our Q&A, but this was an incredibly insightful and thoughtful presentation from the both of you. I really want to thank you both for being here, and of course our live audience here with us today. As far as the follow-up from today's meeting, we'll send out all that information. That includes the presentation slides and the recording. And again, subscribe to the YouTube channel. A couple other things before we go. We are also putting out the next episode of our podcast, The Road Home, which you can access on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm not an Apple Podcasts user, so I almost forgot about it. But we do have another episode coming out. We're on season 5. We also have some focus groups that we're working on this fall. So if you are a landlord, property management, or property manager, feel free to email me and we can get you set up on that. All that said, again, thank you all so much. And we'll see you guys in the next webinar series. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kate.